White House Farm, based on, as I say, true events from the 80s. Matt, do you want to set this up a little bit and then we can talk about it?
Yeah, sort of.
Off you
you
pop
put
then.
you put me on the sort of the hoof
I
sometimes,
just
but this
felt like you hadn't said enough and I wanted to give you your moment in the spotlight.
so this is a new 6-part drama fictionalization of the murders of the Bamber family in the sort of titular White House farm in the mid 80s. The story goes that it was Jeremy Bamber, the younger brother, who rang the police and said, "My sister, again with mental health difficulties," going back to that being the sort of plot point here, has gone berserk, has shot our parents, her children, and then herself in what was sort of a pretty open and shut case as far as the police believed. But then we've got little inconsistencies that are brought up by the police officer played by Mark Addy. It's odd because they both got surnames of Jones. Stephen Graham's character, who's the DCI, wants this just to be over and done with, murder-suicide. It's all in the press. We want to sort of open and shut it as quickly as possible. And I'm guessing it's going to be the sort of conflict between these two, because it's very much this is based on real life events, but we've created characters for fictional purposes. It is a story that a lot of people know. It's recent history. It's one of those. Will they be able to stretch the story out over 6 episodes?
Yeah, that's my thing. And also, I've liked a lot of true crime stories. The Moor Side was a particular favourite. Appropriate Adult was really good, but I've struggled with the recent ones. I didn't continue with A Confession because I knew the story and I just didn't find the retelling of it that compelling. And I have to be honest here, I might be doing a Giri Haji, and Paul might tell me next time he's on that it's wonderful, but I found this really slow. I found a lot of the characters quite dull, and I didn't really care about them or know who they were. And also, some of the performances were really surprisingly wooden, and the Welsh accent really trips up some of our best performers. We had Sarah Lancashire struggle with it in The Accident last year, and now Stephen Graham can't do it. It seems to be the accent that everybody struggles with, and that really took me out of it. And I just struggled to connect to the world, and that shouldn't be the case for a story that, as you say, is recent history, is in people's minds as a thing that happened, and yet it didn't have the authenticity that I felt Deadwater Fell had. And I did read your review, Paul, and you were kinder on it, and I'm not really perhaps getting my point across well, but I just didn't feel connected to it in the same way, even though this did happen. This was a true life story.
Yeah, I've got a tricky relationship with true crime adaptations. I often think, well, what's the point? It feels voyeuristic. You're making something out of a case that happened to people, and often in drama adaptations, characters are often changed, events are changed to fit TV format.
The narrative that works.
Yeah. Sometimes characters are completely made up. There was a show on last year on Alibi called This Is the Night, which talked about the Black Dahlia murder, and the lead character in that was completely made up. Yes, all this sort of stuff happened in the 50s and 60s, but my point is, with true crime, it's never a true adaptation because
it can't ever be, can it?
Can't ever be. So I always think, well, what is the point of these true crime adaptations? Just make a really good documentary to tell the story straight. I actually did like A Confession because it provided an angle of the story, or several angles actually of the story, that I had not heard before. And I think that's the key thing with true crime adaptations. As long as they're providing an interesting element to the investigation that we didn't really know about at the time, then I think that's entirely justifiable. I think what's also key with these true crime adaptations is there has to be some distance between the present day and for when these crimes actually happen. I found A Confession and even Manhunt perhaps a little bit too close to the present day. So, you read stories about relatives just hating them because it dredged up all kinds of horrible memories. Whereas this one happened in the 80s. So you could argue that there was just about the right amount of time between then and now. It was kind of long enough. The amount of time was long enough for people to kind of, oh yeah, I remember that, but I don't remember what happened. Sounds a bit pretentious, but I loved the way it looked. It had this kind of bleached out, sunny feel to it, where it felt like the 80s. Because when I remember growing up in the 80s, every day was sunny. Do you know what I mean? It's that childhood where you think
that
so
like idyllic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
idyllic, kind of bleached out, slightly hazy kind of colour palette to it.
Yeah.
I thought all the cast were good. Freddie Mills that's his name, isn't it? Freddie Mills.
Freddie Fox.
Oh,
Freddie Fox.
Why did I think Freddie Mills? He was a boxer. Anyway, Foxy was really good as Jeremy Bamber, because obviously we all. The other thing with true crime is we all know what's going to happen pretty much. So the challenges for the person who's written this is to hold our attention sufficiently, even though we know what's going to happen. So I do wonder how they're going to string it out.
But you shouldn't and can't compare the two, because although they're dramas, they're very different genres. But do you feel like this set up the world as well as Deadwater Film did? Because that's what I struggled with. It didn't feel like an authentic world. The characters felt a bit paper thin.
You had like some pretty major names playing. Is it Neville Bamber and his wife? Is it Amanda Burton and Nicholas Farrell? Two pretty well-known actors.
Two big faces, yeah.
And then suddenly, this is not a spoiler in any way, shape, or form, because obviously this happened. They were found shot within minutes almost of them being on screen. So I do agree, it didn't perhaps have that kind of impact because it was all over too quickly, and perhaps they didn't spend as much time on the farm. Again, I'm going back to Wurzel.
I didn't feel like everything comes back to Wurzel Gummidge with you.
Yeah, I know.
but I didn't know who these people were, and then all of a sudden I was in the middle of a mystery that I wasn't really sure what the mystery was, because I didn't know who the people were I was supposed to be looking out for.
I sort of liked how it made you go, well, catch up sort of thing. You didn't quite know who everyone was. You had to piece it together yourself rather than the drama holding your hand, and I quite like that element of it. And I like, that was her ex-husband, and it was his housewarming, and then she's, what's my brother doing here? And by you sort of piece things together. I get what you're saying. You didn't maybe spend enough time with the parents before obviously this tragedy happened, and I'm guessing we're probably going to get flashbacks, aren't we?
Yeah, that was going to
be out.
It's pretty. I mean, there were some pretty complicated family dynamics within the Bamber family there, with obviously Sheila's mental health problems and the clashes, because the parents are quite religious, and there was obviously clashes there between them and the kids, and I kind of thought, maybe we could learn a little bit more about that family dynamic. But I think you're right, Matt. I think there will be some flashbacks because why hire Nicholas Farrell and Amanda Burton if you're not going to use them? It was really interesting, actually. Again, just looking at the social reaction. A lot of my crime novelist friends absolutely loved it. Like they were saying, this is like really creepy and nightmarish. However, I have to agree with Luke. I do think that true crime adaptations, there really is a fine line between success and failure in them.
Yeah.
Actually finer than fiction, because you can kind of get away with anything in fiction because it's fiction, right? This is based on a true story. And as soon as Stephen Graham opened his mouth as the Welsh police officer, I didn't know whether to laugh or whether I don't know what it was.
I'd been primed for that because I saw him on Graham Norton, and it was just like, I'd sort of gone, no, you're not really pulling it off, mate.
That's his Achilles heel. We found it. The Welsh accent's the
Well,
only
the same with
thing
Mark Addy. He was a gruff northerner, and his kind of Essex accent was slipping and sliding all over.
I liked him in this, though. I thought he was, for me, the best element is sort of this schlubby sort of copper. Yeah. He did a similar role in, was it Red Riding about 10 years ago on Channel 4?
Brilliant in that.
It was a similar role, and he's going to be the sort of champion of this, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He's the guy that's going to...
the case.
I said to people on the internet, I said...
people on the internet. I said to people,
I went a bit Tommy Cooper, didn't I? I said, but people who expressed like the fact that they absolutely loved it and thought it was creepy, I kind of replied to them and said, "But the accents, though, didn't that not ruin it for you?" And they said, "No, I didn't notice them, or I think they were too into it that they didn't really care."
To be honest,
like that for
I
me,
didn't notice the Mark Addy thing. You know,
Right,
the
okay.
Stephen Graham, the Welsh accent.
yeah.
Is it? Could they not have cast a Welsh actor to play that?
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's always the question: why did they just not cast a Welsh actor, or even an Essex or a Cockney actor for Mark Addy's character?
Yeah,
It stood out like a sore thumb.
People
to me,
will watch
and
it because Stephen Graham is in it, and you
Mm.
know, I assume that's the
was
reason.
big,
Get
he's a
some
big name,
names
and
in
he's
there.
fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but as I say, it really stood out like a sore thumb. And in a true crime drama, when you're striving for authenticity, you want to tell these poor victims' stories as in the best and most authentic way that you can. To suddenly come out and hear this guy say, "All right, boy, how's it going? All right." Where is that? Is that like Wales or Liverpool or Calcutta? I'm not quite sure.
It
I
was
don't know.
walking a very fine line.
I'm going to carry on with it, but it's going to be hard for me to get past. But I think, as Matt said, I think Mark Addy is going to be the one, and I would expect actually Stephen Graham not to be in this that much, and I'm expecting a hell of a lot of flashbacks in this series. So I'm assuming that Stephen Graham's not going to be in it that much. So therefore, I can kind of sit back and enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I probably won't continue because I'm a bit odd because initially when Deadwater fell, I was like, oh, it's a shame, it's only 4 episodes, but obviously that's how many episodes that takes to tell that specific story. And my other worry with this is, like you said at the start, can they sustain 6 compelling episodes with this story? I really wonder.
Because I was saying to someone at work about this that they enjoyed it, and I said, "Well, I don't know if they're going to sort of be able to sustain it over 6." And she was like, "Is it 6 episodes? You already know who's done it. You know."
Yeah.
Whereas the ones you mentioned, the true crime dramas you mentioned, liking appropriate adult more side, they had a different slant to, cases you knew but told from different perspectives. The ones that ITV have done, Manhunt, A Confession, and now this, which seems to be their new wheelhouse of doing these true life dramas. They're very straight. They're very, this is what happened, and we're going from A to B to C sort of thing.
Will you watch it then? Will you continue watching it?
I don't know. It didn't compel me enough, and I think it's 6 episodes is a big commitment, and we're at that time of the year at the moment where there is a lot of stuff to watch, so possibly not. I don't know.